Metaverse urbanism, something practicing and teaching at the moment, but we are actually with the firm we're engaged, and you'll see some glimpses at the end. So yeah, I mean, the internet empowered global knowledge economy, world division of labor. I mean, as this increases, Adam Smith already taught us the expanse of the market allows for higher levels of division of labor and productivity, and I think this one in the knowledge economy is really very widespread, and we are working globally as well. And so the interface, the interfacing between and communicating through the web is a big story, and there's a lot of, I think, advancement in immersive spatial interfacing and communication, and that's going to be the topic. So the 3 C's on the event of cyberspace or the metaverse is that architects will get involved in the design of many internet interaction interfaces, because as they become 3D, as they become immersive and spatial, that I think comes very naturally to architecture. So this will distill the discipline's core competency, namely the spatial visual ordering of information and communicative interaction, which I've always promoted as the core competency. Social functionality it's all about that, and technical functionality issues are engineering. They come in as collaborators, and now with the cyberspace, we have exactly the same remit, but the engineering stack is going to be substituted from structural engineering, for instance, the polygon count and interaction, bandwidth, throughput, etc. Thesis 3, and I have an example of that the VR and AR empowered cyberspace will fuse with urban space, implying transformation of the built architecture and urban life at the same time. So there will be a metaverse, but it's partly access through the contemporary current urban spaces, not only through headsets from the home. So I have the thesis of the high density marketplace urban order that I've now applied to both the metropolis and the metaverse. In the metaverse, it's easier. There's not so many political, let's say, settlements already in place. It's more like the free private city, and it's highly competitive. It's very healthy. And rapid. I say all design is user interface design, user experience design. I mean, we should have known that for a long time, but architects are still, I mean, we're just distilling ourselves out of these, responsibilities which used to be with us, engineering and cost management and so on. And as a head of the design team, we're still overlooking all the technical aspects, but for the sake of delivering that final interface surface. And we're not really responsible for these anymore. We're only responsible for the surface, but for that to be as effortless and socially functional, we need to know the technical constraints, basically. So architecture as UX, UI design for 3D environments, and that real or virtual. So my definition of architecture, it's absolutely seamless with the metaverse, and in fact, I also make a strong point that I think all the design disciplines, this includes fashion design, industrial design, graphic design, it means also web design, they're all colleagues. We all share a discourse and ethos, and we all collaborate with the various engineering stacks below. And but this is architecture / design, and all of these designers will end up in the metaverse. So fashion design will be huge, and it's always a semi-logical project. It looms large. What I call the phenomenological project, a semi-logical project, in all these design disciplines. So the content is the client's task, the form is the architect's task, but the form is obviously not just form, which is pretty. Form is the delivery mechanism for the social functionality, for the ordering of the interaction process through spatial arrangements and morphological identifiers and semiological encoding. So I have these for the disciplines, and that goes for all the design disciplines, except spatiology is particular to architecture, I would say. I have these research or expertises, spatiology, phenomenology, semiology, and dramaturgy, which is in a sense that interaction design, which is very strong in web design recently, but which is also exists in physical design. So, which doors can open and close, how do they open and close, which lights can you switch on, windows you can open, partitions you can shift. And I've been thinking a lot about expanding that a lot once you have actuators and sensors, that as a dramaturgy becomes big, and in this metaverse it is obviously very big. And these are some of the issues one has to look at. The spatiological project is basically spatial arrangements, what's close, what's far, what's permeable from one to the other, what's connected or disconnected. And there's a complexity issues where we have to upgrade, where we cannot just say, oh, we make a grid or we make a series of nested spaces. We have much more complex repertoires to be considering. The phenomenological project is about the perceptually tractable, maintaining legibility in the face of this complexity of ordering, because complexity comes out of society. I mean, it's the myriads of interaction scenarios and types and distinctions we need to establish, the multiplicity of simultaneously available interaction offerings. And then the semiological project is all about making it information rich and making it not only legible perceptually, but legible with respect to the semantics. And then interaction richness is what we're pursuing in the dramaturgical project. So dense, legible information rich environments facilitate orientation, navigation, and recognition for an interaction rich experience, and that's physical and virtual. So here, a lot of these are just general for, you can read that. That's the strength of the analogy I see now. Let's from urban design into metaverse city design, if you like. So these are the topics we need to cover. I mean, or aspects as planning and governance. There's economics, and I believe the metaverse, by the way, will be a open platform in the crypto ecosystem rather than proprietary. I think it's more appropriate for the platform condition and open source condition to really make a city rather than some kind of enclave or and then we need to look at growth trajectories. Urban spatiology, aesthetics and styles are very important. I mean, it's a new world, and I believe that, and parametrism, tectonism, the styles I've been pushing for the contemporary computationally empowered architecture will flourish in the metaverse, because a lot of the constraints and cost issues are not given, and we have a natively digital world to consider. Urban semiology, dramaturgy, interaction. So the metaverse, obviously, wow, there's so many out there about it. It's like the market is amazing, obviously, because I'm thinking about not a total substitution, but a total potential substitution or parallel lives with everything which is expressed as social reality right now. All corporations, all institutions, all educational events, every event will have a potentially its replica in the metaverse. So the market is absolutely massive, and we're already feeling it when we put our feelers out, the amount of requests we're getting, and the amount of startup companies, not only metaverse, big metaverse idea. I mean, virtual event hosts and designers and firms for trade fairs, for conferencing, it's corporate meeting, corporate events, etc. So Decentraland is the example, and you can see how primitive this new world is. They haven't learned much from 100 years of urbanism or 500 years of conscious urbanism and urbanization. And there's a series of issues. I mean, they have some districts, they have these generic grids, some plazas, and the gray is sort of inverted commas public. They have something which is interesting. I come back to the Crypto Valley, because we are that's one of the metaverses we are working on, which is the Liberland metaverse, which is a specifically crypto-oriented, as the organizations which will be hosted there itself going to be a crypto project, a DAO project, but it will also initially target DAOs as primary clients. But they also have, Dragon City, they have Las Vegas, meaning they have gambling, they have they have everything, and it becomes more game-like now, and most metaverses are now nearly like video games. There's no central plaza, there's no city really. That's a fiction because the technological underpinnings, partly because they go decentralized, are such that you don't really have co-location experiences. You go into a plaza where you scroll down menu and you go into a wormhole anyway. So, but we are doing this one. I'll just show you at the end, where you really fly over a city and you can see the various institutions and places and ongoings, and then dive in. I will actually talk more about this at the end. So the key thing is why blockchain, because that legitimacy of open source, open platform, where the contributors or landowners and institutions that invest, they're governed collectively. And it's also a funding route. That's where a lot of startup companies go in there. It's a faster and less constricted funding route. These two things have to be separated, though. The legitimacy element, I think, is very important. And there's, crypto voxels. There's different worlds. They're not very appealing. They have a lot of constraints, and not professional architecture and planning yet. They look like toy towns with toy architecture. That's a competitor. So we feel very kind of confident going in with the great, teams and building up something much more, which has much more depth of technology and intelligence transfers from the world of urbanization, urban planning, urban design, architecture design, than what is at the moment out there. So this space is kind of in overdrive. Yet I think a lot of the current players will not be able to compete with what's coming and what we're getting involved in. But it's interesting with all the kind of events, a lot of Insomnium space, particularly all these night clubbing and clubbing events. There's a lot of VR chatting as well. Decentraland is more, retail, gambling, blah, blah, blah. And the experiences are not great yet, but there is technology out there which can make them way greater. I'm just testing myself in some of those. And then you have this, social platforming. This is the Horizon project for Meta. It's you can play and toy around, but what I'm talking about is the metaverse. I'm more concentrated on business metaverse, if you like, or serious institutions, serious productive communications, conferencing, and education, universities, corporate communication internal to corporate, because a lot of people working from home and interfacing maybe in their buildings into these virtual worlds. So this is quite different.
Patrick, if I jump in there was already a question in the chat.
Let's go. Let's go.
Yeah, there was a question regarding a lot of that. What you present looks a lot like what we had, like whatever 10 years ago, maybe with Second Life and virtual reality, right, to a certain degree. What makes in your opinion, the metaverse more graspable, like that it will be paradigm shifting in the way that this time it will stick, kind of?
Well, because Second Life is really not really integrated with. There were glimpses where you had some universities hosting events in Second Life, and that's the kind of thing which one can hook onto. But there was also a lot of, let's say, a fantastical Second Life, or some maybe, I don't know. This was one of the better projects, but it wasn't integrated. There wasn't that all the major corporations set shop up in Second Life. But there will in these metaverses, and you can start to see it happen in Decentraland with respect to crypto projects and so on. So that these were good precursors, and as well, there's a lot of technology been developed in the gaming industry, of course. That's why at the moment, a lot of metaverses, you find the confusion whether these meant to be video games, play-to-earn games, and that's where at the moment the biggest numbers are, because you have this ready-made population, but it's ultimately a niche. So this would also not be the paradigm. So yeah, I believe it's where I look at the fact that all, for instance, all knowledge workers and corporations and also universities still working online fully and mostly, and never intend to come back fully, by the way. That's what, even our own company, internal survey, and we don't have any space for everybody to come back. We're renovating and making a lot of social spaces for meetings. And that you can see that universally across the Western world. So that will, and everybody's already used to it. All our shows we had, the Shanghai show, the next show in Hong Kong, they're all, we make them, set them up physically, nobody goes, and they're all minutely photographed and turned into VR experiences. So you should actually experience them in the metaverse. So it's a sea change in terms of what happened through COVID, and the investment in the technology space. Also, the new blockchain technologies which coming along, which make this the Web3 a much more liquid and, let's say, interoperable economy across metaverse elements. So, but the Second Life, I haven't played it, but it's more on the side of escape, of game, of play, rather than real social life. Maybe it's not quite true. I don't know enough about it, but that's more. It also stagnated. It had a number of. It grew up to a kind of final level of, I don't know how many million users, and didn't expand further because it wasn't that total substitution I was talking about. It remains a kind of sideshow. I hope that answers that question. And it's not only me who believe it. A lot of major technology companies and massive investment coming into the space. So I don't want to go too much into this. Let's say the policy regimes. I've actually discussed last time what I believe in, certainly for the metaverse, we're thinking of that one could have in the outskirts for sure, and in certain pockets, in incredible amount, leave a lot of degrees of freedom. So you just have maybe parcels and let it rip, basically. Let anything goes. And that's nearly what has happened to Decentraland, except there are technological limits and density limits. But one could do more. One could have a zone which is self-governed, where maybe the landowners have some landowner, local landowner district democracy. There's actually, you'll find that in some of those metaverses already. And then you have an overall sponsored order in the core of that city, maybe where you can lay out and start building things so that you give the city an initial character, which pulls together initial intended audience and type of activity. So it's like, there's a world division of labor between the cities as well. It's not going to be everything in one city. So we're not going to, there may be gambling isn't in the same city as, major universities or the legal companies and all the arbitration companies and legal conferences. So I think that one would be initially curated and commissioned designs from the organization, even maybe before this. In the end, the overall will be a shareholder open governed structure, but in terms of the planning, urban planning could be quite curated or rule based, and then you let loose certain districts, and then you have let totally loose certain zones within that. So that's my idea here, that we don't have a single system, but a system of multiple planning regimes in each metaverse project.
So let me just jump in there just to clarify. So what you're saying is like we move maybe from the traditional sense of policy, which is territorial, right? That's the old school style. Since this doesn't apply to the metaverse, we go more to like DAO structures, or how do you envision that? Like that each DAO with like for people, this is like a decentralized organizational property based on the blockchain, that these govern these distinct metaverse or whatsoever.
Well, we're talking here specifically for urban planning already. So the overall is a DAO. A DAO is, law that it's talked about as the user own and control it, but it's not quite like this. It's basically the democracy of the invested. And a user is, as much as he has some kind of pocket money already, as some tokens, but you need to kind of lock this in usually to gain voting rights. You lock your currency, so it's really not the final end user so much. But I think that's also not required, and I would not actually would find it so useful. It's a democracy of the invested for the overall structure of that world, which is including its economics, including its, let's say, immigration rules, if there are any, and so on. But what I'm talking about here, so that's the DAO. I'm talking here is particularly then the DAO would be in charge of planning systems, planning rules. And my recommendation here is to actually territorialize them in the virtual world in ways that we have different zones where we can experiment with different planning regimes, with more or less restrictions, more or less guidance, or degrees, more radical degrees of freedom, which also might generate problems. So increases the unpredictability what will happen around your site, but also a lot of freedom then to the individual site owner. That shouldn't happen absolutely everywhere. Because I still believe that there are, although less so, there will be positive and negative externalities, and there will be collective action. I mean, the DAO itself can also do a lot of public investment in infrastructure and public spaces and so on. But it could also be on a district level. Landowner associations do more than the DAO does on top. The DAO has to be obviously also in charge in terms of the overall, let's say, server infrastructure and upgrading the algorithms and upgrading number of things. So there's, let's say, DAO would be what the state would be. And here we're talking about particular urban planning regimes, which would be more on the, it would be a sub-department, if you like, but it would be, and here's my recommendations to the DAO, what would in the end the DAO or now as an entrepreneur, because usually these projects are initially entrepreneur-led with VC investors, and then they have the roadmap to become DAOs. They might sell coins before that, so there is already but these coins might not yet be governance tokens because there's too much initially to decide. So that democratic process should come in where there's a relatively settled overall system, and then there is the upgrading and more slower transformation of that system, adaptation of that system to new conditions, where I think a DAO, and it still has to look a lot, worry about potentially the agility of that. But it's important for in terms of buy-in, and also when this becomes a very, very large ecosystem, one really wants to, one needs to, I believe, for credibility and legitimacy purposes, grant a lot of these participation rights. But that is it comes a bit later. But the planning regimes will be initially set by the entrepreneur, and then could be changed by the DAO. So we have that, let's say more like central planning, more private planning, or even no planning potentially. I think we should try that, because you'll find a lot of times that if you want to curate an interesting mix of uses, where do you go by? You look at, probably organically grown districts, where there wasn't a planner. It was more bottom up, through some kind of gentrification process, through a bottom up process. And it's not the fastest, but it's a discovery process in a hierarchical sense. And it needs to be there always as well, where somebody can just buy land and do something and make synergy connections which and contrasts which maybe the curators didn't know, but if that's successful, the curators can take that on and streamline that for other districts. So the economics, I mean, yes, it's going to be cryptocurrencies and NFTs for the land parcels and NFTs for digital assets, but there will be more. There will be also and there will be a lot of economic players, so the initial founders, investors, the landowners who first come in. But I believe also that land owners and real estate developers might not be the same. And then they will hire designers. You have owner-occupiers, the hosting organizations, who might hire an architect or who just occupy on a long lease a building. So it's very much the same as in the real world. And then you have the tenants and the final end users. And of course, one thing is clear, that all value ultimately flows from the final end users, because that's where the functionality and social functionality resides. And from there, it percolates through all those who've contributed to make that happen. And I mean, we in none of the current metaverses we have reached that point, maybe only in some of the video game metaverses, that we have a lot of end user action. So a lot of this needs to be anticipated. But all of these players in the end join together as stakeholders in the DAO. I mean, end users, as I said, only to the extent that they're continuously using the space, so they hold a cash balance. But probably not but that if they wanted to actually vote, usually they would have shortly have to freeze part of their cash balance as well. So in the event, those who only hold cash for usage, they wouldn't be voting. They would also be very kind of ephemeral. So it makes sense to, in certain commas, freeze or vest. But if they are, then the end users, everybody is included in the DAO. So
Patrick, there was just a question on the economic actors. There was a question about the service providers. I mean, Armin asks about the event creators facilities. I think they come later down, but maybe the more fundamental question is where in the value creation is the different hosts of the metaverse? Like, Meta, like former Facebook is very prominent, probably Apple, like Amazon with AWS, right? These will be the creations. They have a meta perspective on the metaverse. Like, I don't even know how to conceptualize this in the real world. There wouldn't be a nation state or whatever. They are just literally the overlords there, right?
Yeah, but I don't believe that the proprietor firm like Meta would win out, because I mean, for all the developments who come in, they're vulnerable to policy shifts and censorship, and this might also come through the government. So a company like Facebook was way more under pressure from, for instance, Congress than let's say something like Decentraland. Because they totally exceed also single nation conditions. So the permissionlessness and censorship resistance is one aspect I think which means that the DAOs will win out. They can just be more radical in their approach. They can ignore, let's say, regulatory overreach. That's my appraisal for much longer. That's why I think the big companies will find it hard to be trusted, because even if they wanted to, there are also these kind of PC pressures where they have to do more censorship maybe than they should quite quickly. So that's why I think the DAO will be, and that's everybody through that governance process, which needs to be designed, and it's also designed by the DAO later on in a self-referential loop. That stands in for the proprietary, what the Facebook or Meta would be. By the way, let's say hosting organizations were for me the event organizers. I mean, the tenants, for instance. You can let's say event promoters. Maybe I should write that down here as well. They're meant to be included here for definitely, also for temporary events. hiring in a stadium which is there, or an arena, or a fairground to host a product launch and so on. So the end user activity is really like everything: co-working, conferencing, learning, visiting, cultural events, shopping, socializing. Residential, initially I didn't have in there, but then actually Zuckerberg was quite right. I mean, I can imagine if you have a great city there, residences would mean obviously just a small social group where you can invite friends and show off their NFT collection and go to the balcony or look out of the window into the events, into the city, and experience the life of the city with friends. So I think that does exist. I mean, I've already talked to several people who have where the clubhouse of things like Soho House or Shoreditch House. I mean, these networks of clubs where they want to go into the metaverse, and so it's quasi. The residence would be more of a private version of that. So I think everything will have a register and have a version, and particularly I believe that, for instance, all corporations have one, and then they also have many in all these headquarters and places in all the cities, and then they will be designed together with the metaverse version, and there will also be several metaverses that will be represented as well. Anyway, we will have various markets. We have the land market, the real estate market, and each time there is either direct land sales or there is leases, secondary markets where transaction fees flow back to the DAO. And you could also, what is interesting about the real estate market, the buildings, you can take them with you. You can shift them more to the outskirts, or you can shift them to another metaverse potentially. So they're less tied to land; they become more independent assets, which is quite interesting. But but a complex, highly functional design, and you have to hire a serious design crew, and they're working also for months on this. So there's a lot of value in there as well. It's not so easy to replicate, because I don't think about this kind of self-made world, which is now happening, but very well designed professional venues. Digital asset markets, obviously, with fitting out the various designs, and as well as vehicles. I do believe that vehicles make sense. There's a lot of pedestrianization, but a large city, you could either teleport, but then you lose a sense of browsing. So you go into a beautiful, bubble vehicle with friends, and you roam the city and look at opportunities. You get out and join a chat room or a conference center. So I do believe vehicles as well. In there with all their secondary markets. Of course, rental markets, event ticketing, in-world advertising, it's going to be all of that. So it's a real replica. And it's a bit like, if you look at DeFi at the moment in the crypto universe, there is two things happening. One is radical innovation and new stuff, but there's also the copying over of all legacy ideas and systems. So you will have both copying over all the institutions and mechanisms and ideas and all the analogies which make it a quickly orientable space, but then there will be also innovations in there, I believe.
Patrick, there's a question from Noor, if that's okay, or maybe we bring her in quickly. Noor, please.
Thank you very much for the interesting information. I just had a question that came to my mind. So we were talking about places.
You're breaking up a little bit, Noor.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult. Maybe I should leave my earphone.
No, it's also breaking up for us. So just give her a second, maybe.
Yeah, headset maybe.
Yeah.
Do you think you can hear me better? Is it better? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, thank you. So I had a question, actually. A question came to my mind. It can be irrelevant, but you know how so you were talking about the places that would be rented, the venues, or the apartments and lands that could be brought, but the value of districts come from the transportation. Such a transportation, meaning that, for instance, a district in let's say LA is valuable because people tend to go there. There's the transport, the fact that you came out of your home and take a bus or whatever you take, or a car, you go there and then you actually go through all these different districts. And I think this also creates the value of the neighborhood. Hence comes the value of an apartment that you're going to buy or a rent. So the more flow that you attract to your district, the more valuable your asset becomes in
yes,
that
yes, I agree
district.
with that.
I don't know whether I can. So
no,
without
no,
the,
I mean, that is
yeah,
absolutely correct. And Decentraland, but where the experience isn't really there, and you rely on scroll down menus for teleporting into events.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
not the
So
city.
you don't. Yeah.
There you don't have it. Actually, what is interesting, and they thought there would be co-locations. I mean, that the lands are much more expensive close to Central Plaza, but that's not yet relevant the way the technology of Decentraland, for instance, works. But it should be. So maybe they were speculatively okay initially paying much more, but effectively it's not. But you're absolutely right. So I believe in the co-location synergies, and of course things like footfall for certain things important, and also what you want to be close to and next to will have a big role to play. So I believe that. And but for the overall metaverse, so it's the multiple metaverses. We need to. I don't think it's going to be one for everything, but one needs to. It's a bit like somebody who's creating an office estate and says this is a media center, and if I can get great media companies, then I have, it's not just generic office space. Is being part of that industry hub. This is the kind of logics we need to install, and Liberland Metaverse, which I showed at the end, is that with respect to crypto spaces. So particular co-location synergies and network effects will be very important for which metaverse will win out. And there will be a certain amount of first mover advantages, but there will only be really stay advantages if these initial, let's say, wave of money is used right away to address technical issues and experiential issues and so on, which it's no good of having initial value surges cashed out by founders or VCs. That's why you need very, very long vesting schedules, actually, and the spirit of reinvesting, because the race is going to be on for a number of years. Shouldn't be thinking of quick profits here. This is going to be a heavily invested, but you're absolutely right with the importance of being part of something. That's what I have here: agglomeration economies, co-location synergies, network effects. Agglomeration economies, you have been anyway. A lot of people use some facilities, but co-location synergies also that we're thinking of information exchange and cooperation potentials. So anyway, so it's very important.
Just let me add to this, maybe, Patrick, and maybe hear your thoughts on this. I see it as a big reshifting of the price mechanism, right? So we had traditional ways how the prices were like impacting in a different paradigm, right? So for example, physical distance, right? That was one of the key primary value drivers, and the market adjusted for that. And we have a very accurate like pricing mechanism. But now we have to develop a new pricing mechanism. And that's what you see in the crypto world or the NFT world, especially, that we are not clear what the reference points are. And that's why you see a lot of speculation, and I think that's necessary. As in any financial market, you will have speculation until the market saturates and knows the fair price for something, at least has an indication of what are the value drivers behind it.
We're a long way away from this, because as I said, finally fundamentals can only be end user value, where people go to these events, go to these seminars, where the metaverse can, is bidding for the next Bitcoin conference to be hosted here rather than elsewhere. And then you finally have, and that will also mean in-world usage of the token. And that's the final demand, which really drives and maintains the values. But all the cash balances are kept and used, and new users coming in eventually will stabilize. That's the key. And none of these projects is anywhere near reaching this. It's a bit like, a lot of the tech companies are growth companies. They're not making even a profit yet. So, but I agree with you. Yeah, these final pricing models, there's a number already out there. I mean, I think I believe at the moment in the relatively strong analogy, the kind of city I think it's worth having will also have distance as a key factor. And of course, distance from what? From key other attractions. So this is also a moving target and you could have a new district evolving through players. You can also make a value this way. It's like, like the way certain hip districts emerge in London, like Hackney, for instance, unexpectedly. And so this is also a dynamic process, which it's with a lot of moving targets. But I agree with you that there is a lot of uncertainty right now in terms of valuations. But I think when I'm at the moment thinking in terms of a strong analogy with real cities. Of course, you don't have things like infrastructure cost or brownfield clearings. And as I said, there's a big difference that you can shift assets. You can even potentially have land more topologically located, etc. Anyway, so I just don't want to. I mean, I see something similar, like even these growth trajectories where you spin off satellite cities and more porous at the fringes. Anyway, so there will be interesting if you have, dynamics of self-segregation. This is the famous study of where you can computationally recreate some of these ethnic groupings, which actually, interestingly enough, you only need to presume a kind of relatively low preference for not being swamped by another ethnic group to have very, very full segregation. So there's a kind of system effects one has to look into, and this would be, for instance, to if you wanted to more mixity. I mean, I don't think it's going to be much ethnic, although some of this might also be there. So but there will be a Chinatown, a Koreatown, etc. But in terms of also to have the various trades separating out. Anyway, there are certain logics. Once you have a very, very free market process, which I condone because co-location synergies, which is the real driver value of joining an agglomeration, they can also they really have to be found by the players themselves, who they want to be close to, and where they want to not having much zoning. I think zoning can be kicked off as in a suggestive way to kick off these self-sorting mechanisms. Okay, so urban spatiology, we have to get away from these. Look, this is Ebenezer Howard. That's exactly the pattern of Decentraland. I mean, these kind of crystals. You have to kind of layering is more interesting, like in Barcelona. And we look urban space. That's an interesting study. Not only abstract pattern, but what it means for urban space, Camille City. Anyway, these kind of radical zoning. I'm just going to fly through. So basically what I'm saying is layering of systems on top of systems that then could have a landscape substrate, a superimposition, like multiple reference systems overlapping, so that different audiences with different reference systems, different life processes can occupy and interweave in the same territory. So let's say the history of, this is something we've did in the 90s with Columbia University, the history of the kind of complex layered urbanization of let's say 20th century urbanism and urban concepts, Otto, etc., is all relevant. I think here I don't want to go into detail, but also looking, analyzing and developing tools and metrics like space syntax, like network theory. These will all, I think, relevant. I don't know how big some of these agglomerations will become. Anyway, there's a whole series of concepts and measures upgrading the intelligence of, which we should anyway do for urban designers and urban planners, but it's all relevant. But also urban phenomenology, so spatial cognition, because what I really believe is that in the metaverse, you come in and you can see many more things. It's kind of layered in 3D space, above, below, all around, and you can you can shift your perspective and more comes into view. It's different from, you know, handling panels and windows and scroll down menus. You have peripheral vision where you pick up things. It's more intuitive. So I do believe that there is more an heightened browsing navigation potential, where you could also, if you know the destination, just teleport there. But that's not the interesting thing. The interesting thing is serendipitous encounters, discovery, browsing, and because things are sorted with respect to relevance already for you in the city because of collocation synergies, it's an automatic a texture which gives you a lot of clues what else you might want to do. What is connected spatially is functionally, relevantly tied in with together. So. But then, how do you structure that 3D space in ways which maintains legibility in the face of complexity? So there's spatial cognition and navigation research which we're going to do, and what type of system salient points like landmarks, axes, grids, organized hierarchized networks, nested, working with boundaries, working with gradients and fuzzy sets. What would be their, let's say, cognitive pros and cons? Anyway, this is the whole thing. That basic navigation will be more like this, where you have many things in view at each time, and then you turn a corner and another thing opens up. There's always, like, say, 50 and not just 5, which you have in these deeper networks. I mean, this is faster and more exciting, but this is the kind of magazine-based web, and this is the, let's say, the city-based web. And therefore, the image of the city, the classics of our discipline, I think, will be important. So you can recognize gestalts and atmospheres in the various districts and buildings, and get a sense of an order as well. And yeah, so some of these Gestalt psychology, I've been interested in. Architecture was interfacing with that for quite a while, and I've been interested in that. Will also be relevant here. Anyway, so you have paths, nodes, landmarks, edges, districts. This is just the repertoires of Kevin Lynch, and there's more. And you need a global order somehow. If there's too many landmarks, that doesn't work. Too many districts doesn't work. Gradients, I think, is very important for maintaining global order. And so there's this kind of problem, and the problem is real. So if you look at, if it's just these discrete destinations in a grid, it's frustrating. I have too many apps now, and I have to find it. I can't easily. And then you swipe across your phone. Where's the app? Where's the app? Where's the app? Have I deleted it? So you can see already here, this is, there's a crisis point where you have an unstructured, disordered manifold with a iconography of pure difference is not working. So we need a system, a semiological system, which also uses positionality and uses order, etc. Going back further to figure ground reversal, space versus figure, what you focus on. So all of that, and the Gestalt grouping principles. So there's a big story, and observer positional dependency of what you see and what becomes conspicuous. There's a big thing. Then there are styles, and I think that's it's not going to be any of that cyber stuff, but it will be parametricism. It will, because for reasons which is about this, maintaining legibility in the face of complexity, having textures, but having textures with rhythms and not isotropic monotony, where you can have an overall sense of where you're moving towards, local maxima or global maxima, and where you can have a differentiation of types, but you also have an in-betweening and field conditions. And you could also play with dynamic accentuation of the event dependency. So some of the animation will be very sensitive to moving elements could come through. So this is research of AADRL and Zahadid with these kind of more, let's say, what we call parametric urbanism, field conditions, scripting logics, and just fly through this. But where you can have both differentiation and continuity. So you have maintained district identity, but you have a series of radical variations in scale and size and stuff. And so we have a lot of, let's say, background research which I think could be relevant, but also where you have the facade, a deep kind of articulation which tells you where you closer to or further away from public space, the relief recedes or zooms up. So everything is tectonically is semiology and phenomenology, and no longer it's in any way in the built environment. All technical elements have become semiological, phenomenological element anyway. So nothing new here. Okay, so land values will maybe directly map if you allow densities to flow. Anyway, so I'll just go quickly through that. This is just our repertoire which we're bringing now into the metaverse design. Before I show you some metaverse design examples. Sorry. Okay, there was some. We also are doing some navigability studies with using VR to understand, so the top view, you show them a destination, you throw them down, find that place where they're looking, which routes do they take, and then we also try to actually AI, so neural network, simulate an agent, navigating agents who did quite well, etc. But it's very important that what I showed you up to now was relatively homogeneous, single hand, algorithmic derived, but we will have something which is more diverse, where we get more multi-authors coming in, and we need more repertoire, more differentiation. So these are some experiments where multiple students work together. So what's important that if we have many architects, many designers coming into the metaverse, so it doesn't become a visual chaos, that this is our discipline coming in, not a free-for-all of autodidacts and anybody uneducated or semi-educated. I mean, and there's also interesting to our own discipline. You need to have that ethos of participating with these gradients for understanding, embedding into a district identity. I mean, clients would also demand it anyway. Having degrees of conspicuity and having a semiology which really is eloquent with respect to all the elements in the city you want to connect to, etc. So you can see here many different authors, many different nuances and interfacings. So that I think there's a coherency and a unity across differences. And so they have done a number of these experiments where different teams, different projects share an ethos, create spaces together. So you don't have to design always the leftover space, but some sides overlap with the shared space. So these are I'm making big demands on the discipline. This is a multi-author projects for London. I showed it last time. So this is my vision of high density layered urbanization, which has the variety and coherency, certain parametric and tectonism methodologies at play. Anyway, this is not something you can easily presuppose, but maybe within one of the metaverses, one can, through a sort of charismatic leadership and inviting and recommending designers and having design review boards, getting something which isn't oppressive, has a lot of degrees of freedom, but has degrees of coherency. So some of these there's a whole generation of new architects globally around the world who would be willing and able to do that, to give a sense of coherency. So I don't know if we're running out of time, but this project is another one located in Queens, a number of buildings coming together, and they are cyber urban incubators. So these buildings are all windows into virtual worlds, both on the interior and exterior. And they have, again, 4 of those. This is all AIDRL work. So basically the idea, as I said, instead of sitting at home with goggles on or on your laptop, you go in and you have meetings together with others who are in the same space and connecting up with other groups virtually everywhere. So there will be panoramic screens, there will be holographic projections. It's a much more mediated environment, and it's not an isolated experience. It's corporations connecting up with those who aren't there or with other locations in the world. So this is the idea of a highly mediated environment where every surface nearly becomes a screen and potential into a virtual world, or where, you know, at the head of the table you get a holographic projection of somebody coming in, etc. So these are some conceptions. You can see the environment becomes more semi-virtual in feel, and actually literally are a lot of these spaces you look in are rendered spaces, and then you have avatars and AR layering into the space. So it's a much more mixed reality space. That's the idea of these. And in this case, the idea was that, oh, sorry. Okay. Anyway, I should move on. Some of these scooped out spaces will then become total virtual worlds. So this is in the overall building. There's these scooped out zones, and we have like IMAX for those who are there to participate, but also other things will be flying around like holographs in those. So this is some of the what is important here, that there's a design and identity continuity between real and virtual spaces. So they are this in one cast. Yes, there's certain degrees of abstraction, degrees of transparency and further information overlay in the virtual, but they're designed by the same designers, so the continuities make sense. Okay, so finally I want to show the Liberland idea. We took the idea of Crypto Valley, but this is also in this case potentially becoming real. So I think also that some of the metaverse communities are also advancing. Later, you gather a community of co-location and collaborators and socially tied in, and later maybe you settle together. Something similar. That's the metaverse anyway strongly oriented towards the real city analogy. And okay, so we really developed a lot of interaction spaces in with our buildings. There's the overview where you can see the different places. There's incubator spaces. So we have here the city hall. We have an exhibition NFT museum, NFT plaza, the DeFi plaza, the DeFi incubator, and a series of projects buildings for Ethereum and others, and then a series of further buildings for renting. And then in the meantime, we have plotted out all of that. That's a real project. We are looking for investors. We have this. There's already one building accessible in VR, multi-user. Worked through for multi-user access, and we're going to launch relatively soon. So we have this. City hall means also we want to have think tanks and political debates. art and cultural districts, work incubators in the DeFi and crypto space, etc. So this is some of the initial designs. This is the initial incubator building, which I show you some samples of. The plot is great because Liberland exists, but Liberland is also that, you know, that libertarian project which is very, very famous in the whole crypto world. And it had announced, you know, 10 years ago that whenever it's founding, like now 7 years ago, Bitcoin is its kind of national currency, etc. So I think it's a good has a good branding and community. It has, you know, 700,000 e-citizens around the world who are all crypto investors. So it's good. I think it's credible as a crypto metaverse. If we get it, if we pull it off, which I think we would with the experience, because you can see here this is relatively photorealistically rendered, and the experience is really great if you go to the space. These are early sketches, so you can make sometimes hovering elements, but it's very grounded and a lot of exterior space because the inside and outside distinction is not strong. So I think a lot of things should be intervisible, inter-aware in the public spaces as event spaces, but of course then interiors where you have exhibitions, where you have more controlled environments, or you have conferencing environments, etc. But we took out columns. This is NFT Plaza, so you can see here it's many different things happening simultaneously, and you can see into buildings what's going on. They're switching on light. They have an event. By the way, in that building here, you can throw your screen onto the window and share screen like you would now. I could share my video and run a video on that screen in that space. NFT Plaza, etc. It works quite well. This is the political space. And wait. Sorry, my laptop is slowing down. And I'm nearly done. Oh, God. Okay. You know, the incubator, we've now rendered it much more nicely. Oh, 1 second. Yeah. Okay. It goes through. Great. Yeah, here you can see these are snapshots from the actual space where you can roam around. There's a series of atriums, there's a glass floor, this big panoramic window, you can share your screen on it. You can go another level and you can look out into the city. And you can overlook the next level, and you see the city in the background always. So that's the experience you get right now, where you can have a group of people coming and chatting and having a conference, sharing, get several screens shared on the panoramic window. Works quite well. The exhibition center, etc. So I stop here, and we can maybe open the debate if there's time left.
Yeah, that's great. It depends on your time, Patrick. We went a little bit over time, but if you have 5 to 7,
if there's more questions, then let me stop sharing. By the way, you can go online and find a video of that event, of that metaverse, as well as we've done a NFT gallery with Kenny Schachter, which was at Art Basel and at Art Basel Miami. So we are getting into it. We also playing with PUBG Mobile, not because we love video games, but to learn more about the constraints and work with professionals. In the end, it is important to me that this is an extension of productive social reality, productive social life, and not an escape into video games.
Okay, great. So first, let's give a round of applause for Patrick's presentation. Truly amazing, and I also just mind-blowing how in 1 year your tone shifted, right? We invited you last year to a similar conference, and there we talked about traditional urban spaces, and now it's all about the metaverse. And I mean, you have a big fan here amongst Armin. He's our resident metaverse expert. Okay. So he's always pitching it to me because I'm rather skeptical. But let me ask you the first question.
Go to some of the experiences they start to work, and they give you a different buzz and different sense. You know, if we could meet after this. We could have an after party. You can join a small group and chat or whatever, and it makes sense. For instance, for conferencing, clearly.
Yeah, I see the potential. So first of all, for participants, you can either raise your hand on Zoom, but also continue in the chat. I will read some of them out, but I will, as usual, abuse my own right to ask certain questions. So my first question is, what will be, so we looked at Edward Glazer's book, The Triumph of the City, and the forces that lead to urbanization and urban sprawl. How do you see the future of the physical city then? Will there be, like you said about this continuity of the experience between the metaverse and urban social life? So let's say call it real social life, although I don't want to discredit the other social life, right? But how is the continuity? Will this overall, the metaverse trend, be urbanization force, or will it be a urban sprawl force, like in the end making people leave high dense urban areas because they have their downturns, but they always have been used for social interactions and especially the labor market? So I don't know whether my question makes sense, but what is the real world implication?
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. I really don't know what the net balance is. I mean, the pressure for urbanization has been so large, and the desire to join cities have been super large, but the readiness of cities to absorb more wasn't there, because that's why you have these skyrocketing prices everywhere because of the zoning restrictions on new construction in places like San Francisco and etc. It's extreme, but also in London it's very heavy. So I do believe that there could be a resorting. So particularly if there's more space available, if some of the office and workspaces will be less quantity, so that could be substituted with residential, and then you would have what I find in London, is that during the pandemic, for instance, everybody works from home, but the socializing, if it was allowed, is full on. In Shoreditch, where I live, the pubs and bars and clubs, it's absolutely super crowded, and this was also the beginning of the pandemic, but people never came back to the office, but they kept, they quickly came back to social life. So that's one aspect, and university life as well. I mean, I've been teaching offline, but people like to be and join some lectures, some events, work in studios together, and the same with our company. So I think that there will be a sorting out, where if there's more space available, all the better. If more can come in. And maybe the concentrated work will be from home, but you go to the office if it's closer in walking distance, then more than up to now, less commuting. I think then it would be all for the better, and it will feel more urban than before, because I don't find massive commuting crowds make for a good urbanity feel. So if that pressure is a little bit off, and you get more people living in the city and work in the city, even if they only walk to the office in the afternoon for the meeting and conferences, etc. So I think the net balance, I don't know, but I think it's if those who want to be in the city could be, and that's my thesis. I mean, we have this. We find it in all corporations. You don't want to have this. The fact that where now every meeting still has to be on Teams or Zoom, because you don't want to disenfranchise those who are not coming in, and you want to put them on equal footing, and then the people who are actually in the office don't use that. So these kind of hybrid scenarios, I think, are important. If the experience of joining a mixed meeting is better, then I think that will be you will have a lot of that interaction into the metaverse, also in urban and shared spaces. That means it doesn't push out the urbanization. So you don't have to go home to participate in the metaverse. You're in the urban space, you're at university, you're at your company, and you there's the window into the virtual. And there's also a booth where you can pull into more individualized. But I think it's now already the trend. I mean, a lot of people experience, they yearn for, this shared experience, and the mixed reality, I think, is the way forward.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. I guess that's the major development there. There's a question by Nazish. She asked basically, okay, the metaverse has amazing potential, but we also see that internet culture and social media have created a lot of cultural issues. And I guess here I'm adding myself. If you take in the crypto crowd and like other like social media phenomenon, interaction isn't as smooth, right? And there's a lot of things that come out of it that are very toxic, and that wouldn't happen maybe with face-to-face interaction. So how do you think about this? Because you, as you said, you combine insights from sociology, economics, with architecture, and then nowadays technology. So how do you think about that? Do you think like interaction in the metaverse, let's put it that way, or in these hybrid urban metaverse environments will be living up to the same standards of socializing as well as social interaction?
Yeah, certainly more than being on Twitter or on anonymous, text-based interactions, because you will, first of all, you will be maybe with friends when you interact, which might be a disciplining element, and secondary, you will have. The avatar technology is getting better and better. I'm not such a great fan of anonymity or pseudonymity. I think we should expect people to come in with their identity proper, but in various spaces. And I think that a lot of space will require that. Surely in work environments and in professional meetings, as well as I think it's in academic scenarios, and you all have your name here. And oftentimes I've seen in seminars or even public lectures that if somebody's asking a question, the person is asked to introduce themselves. I think that makes sense. And that more of that would be happening in the metaverse, with the way I envisage it. It's quite photorealistically rendered, real feel, real sense of somebody else's presence, maybe with the face visible and maybe with the face inflated when it's a bit of a distance. You have these kind of hovering additional information which could help to close the gap between what you can get in a face-to-face. Maybe it's never fully closed, but so I think it will be much more similarly civilizing, where you get a sense of the other's reaction, and you can I don't think it will be as toxic easily. I mean, it depends on the host, setting also the tone, the rules, and so on.
I also linked in the chat a nice talk by Balaji, where he talks about the pseudonymy economy.
Yeah. We we're working with. I mean, we met with him as well. Yeah.
He's a great, he's one of the greatest minds out there, I would say. Like, I'm jealous. Let's put it that way. He's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's tempting to have the pseudonymy thing going, but I think we can also, reinvent ourselves without denying aspects of our lives or hiding aspects of our lives.
Yeah, cool. We have one last question for you, Patrick, which is Marlon. He says, metaverse applicability may depend on the level of how a city has been smart. Should a regular normal city wants to become a smart city yet, metaverse may be a bit far to achieve considering funds, which you have mentioned in the beginning of your talk, but maybe the government intervention on metaverse application, or should it be purely private? So I just add to Marlon's question here, like, how do you think, like, especially developing countries would be, should be thinking about this, and city developers?
I mean, there's major issues on the horizon, which I think are opportunities and challenges. So I think these metaverse obviously operating across jurisdictions. There will be global community ventures. I mean, building global communities, which are footloose in many ways, and they will build up their own jurisdictional systems. I mean, and I believe anyway in that. I mean, I believe in private arbitration and private and multiple, self-evolving legal systems. And I think the metaverse will force this forward. I don't know how governments will interface. I hope governments are not cracking down. I don't think it will make a lot of sense. I trust in the self-organization capacities. I think that to some extent there, and when it comes to, for instance, cybercrime, and I would trust also in self-regulation and entrepreneurial solution to this at the point of origins. You know, PayPal delivered safe financial interactions on the internet. There was no help whatsoever from any government or enforcement or anything, and it's even now it's relying on government for protections in that global world is going to be probably an illusion largely. So I think these systems need to be built from within these competing worlds, and they're competing also with security, like all the different blockchains are. And not only competing with transaction costs, and there will be some risk takers, and some people will make mistakes and lose something, and I think there will be different worlds for different tastes. People can have different degrees of robustness with respect to what they would suffer in encounters. I mean, we're getting ever more kind of. I've recently talked to somebody who's enjoyed video games. And is not a teenager, and the way you kind of tackled and angemacht in such spaces might be a culture shock for some of us. So, but I wouldn't come in heavily with it. Government can't get in there. I believe it's a hopeless fight. I believe in these. I wouldn't call them. They're private, but they become like bit nations. They become global structures which have as much sophistication and resources as many governments, and maybe more, that don't overburden maybe a small amount of parliamentarians. So I believe these processes have a chance to be the most sophisticated and trustworthy. Some of those metaverse DAOs, and if believe in their ecosystems of they will be better than an ecosystem of competing and collaborating DAOs, and I think that world has long legs.
Yeah, I mean so much to talk about, and thanks for inspiring us. I think I haven't thought about the metaverse in that way. As I said, I'm always in a battle with my colleague Armin here about what we think about it. Usually I call him out on the BS, but I think you have sold me to a certain degree today on it.
Okay. Thanks.
So yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Patrick, for being here, for stimulating us and like bringing us into the first leg of our seminar. We will talk in the next upcoming days with also people like Alain Berthaud, much more traditional in the sense of thinking about.
Yeah, say hello for me, because I've been on a number of panels with him.
Yes, of course, we will do. Thanks for giving so much time to us, and
my pleasure.
Again, I'm really happy. I'm still processing, I have to say.
Okay,
so I'm still processing. Thanks, Patrick, and enjoy your day.
Bye now.
Thanks. Yep.
Bye now. Bye.
Bye. So.